Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Kevin Blekicki Show in junction with the Ryan Show. We have an amazing show for you planned this week. It is jam-packed. We have to talk about the bombshell news of Lane Kiffin leaving Ole Miss after the Egg Bowl and before the college football playoff starts, in which he was coaching a team that was going to be playing in it and leaving for their Magnolia Bowl rivals, the LSU Tigers. We're going to break down all of the college football playoff rankings, who made it in, who didn't, who deserves to be in, who doesn't. We're also going to talk about the turmoil that happened in the Mets locker room because these stories never come out when the team is winning. So when the team fails, all of a sudden there's going to be these stories that come out about how terrible the locker room was. In 24, when they were winning, everything was great. In 25, when they were losing, everything was terrible. No shock there. And of course, we will break down my New York Jets getting their third victory of the season against the Atlanta Falcons at home. But first, we have to talk about the bombshell news of Lane Kiffin leaving Ole Miss and going to LSU. He has signed a 7-year, $91 million contract to be their head coach. Look, you can't blame Lane Kiffin in this scenario because he's just a product of his environment and he is a symptom of a much larger problem. The way that the current college football playoff week, the way that their schedule is laid out, it puts teams and coaches in difficult spots where they have to start preparing for next season in the middle of the season that they're already having. Now, Lane Kiffin is known for jumping from team to team. He is, a frat boy. He has no loyalty to anybody. And hey, if someone's pulling up with the bag and they're saying we're going to give you $91 million over 7 years, I don't expect anybody to turn that down. That is generational wealth right there. Lane Kiffin already has generational wealth, but if someone's going to offer you an even bigger bag on top of the bag that you already have, go on and take it. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be rooting for LSU because LSU has continuously proven themselves to be the villain, whether it be just employing Kim Mulkey. I'm not fond of that lady whatsoever. Malaysia Fulwiley transferring from South Carolina after winning a national title and going to LSU. Now, like I said, she already did win a national title and have a perfect season with us, but that does not mean that I wanted her to leave, and she was my favorite player on the team, and now I can't root for her and do not wish the best for her. That's just my personal opinion. I know a lot of the Gamecock fans are a lot nicer than me, but I come moving in the world of male sports where if you leave me, you're dead to me. I'm sorry for getting on that tangent. I'm very passionate about that subject. But then you also have Brian Kelly, who did some bad things, and some people are no longer here that should be, and they are no longer with us as a result of Brian Kelly. And Brian Kelly ended up, leaving Notre Dame in the middle of the night to go to LSU. So I hate Brian Kelly. I hate LSU for hiring them. And then, of course, you got to hate LSU for poaching Lane Kiffin in the middle of a playoff run with Ole Miss. It's a cruel world we live in. There's no such thing as loyalty in college sports anymore, especially college football, with the transfer portal and all this NIL money, and it basically being a pay to play scheme. But that doesn't mean that I don't have to like Lane Kiffin and I don't have to root for him, and I'm not going to. But this did bring up kind of an interesting point in the college football playoff, because if y'all remember a few years ago in 2023, uh, the Florida State Seminoles got screwed over by the college football playoff committee and got left out of a 4-team playoff because their quarterback, Jordan Travis, again drafted by my New York Jets, after knowing that he was injured, This team is just competently run from the top down. But after Jordan Travis got injured, the College Football Playoff Committee elected to leave them out of the playoffs because they did not think that their team was as good without Jordan Travis being there. So there is a precedent for a team being left out of the playoff because a key member or members of their team is no longer there. So Lane Kiffin is now at LSU. Their offensive coordinator, Charlie Weiss Jr., I should say, son of former Notre Dame coach Charlie Weiss Sr. He is also taking the job at LSU. He was on the plane to go to LSU from Mississippi, and he's going to be coaching as their offensive coordinator for the college football playoff. So, I mean, I agree with Lane Kiffin being left off of the team. He signed a contract with LSU to be their head coach, so there's no reason why I would want him to coach his team through the playoff. I know that's what he wanted, but you don't get to leave and then still coach the team and then try and poach them and send them, and try and poach them from your team. You can't do that. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So I totally agree with Ole Miss putting their foot down and saying that Lane Kiffin can't coach. Now, why they let Charlie Weiss come back and coach, I guess it's not fair to the kids. I don't know what their reasoning is. But Pete Golding, their defensive coordinator, did not get the interim head coaching job. He got hired as their full-time head coach. That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But Tulane's head coach, John Sumrall, got hired as Florida's head football coach. So, and he's going to be coaching the team through the playoffs should they make it and win their conference championship. So we'll see how that all ends up, playing out. I think it's absolutely messed up that Lane Kiffin just gets to leave like that. But at the same time, as I mentioned, he's just a product of the environment, and you got to blame the NCAA, and they got to do something with the schedule and change it so teams are able to retain their coaches and their players and not have to worry about them transferring to another school in the middle of a college football playoff run. It's been a disaster. So that is one disaster for the Ole Miss Rebels and the college football playoff, but we got to talk about the rest of the rankings. I will quickly go through them. Starting off at number 25, James Madison is now ranked. Number 24 is North Texas. Number 23 is Iowa. Georgia Tech at 22. Houston at 21. Tulane at 20. Michigan drops 4 spots to 19. Arizona's now number 18. They jumped up 7 spots. Virginia is in the ACC championship. They have a chance to make the playoffs if they win the ACC championship game on Saturday against Duke. They are now 17th. USC, Southern Cal, is ranked 16th. 15th is the Utah Utes. 14 is Vanderbilt. 13 is Texas. They jump up 3 spots after beating Texas A&M. And this is where things get hairy. Number 12 is Miami. Number 11 is BYU. Number 10 is Notre Dame. Number 9 is Alabama. Number 8 is Oklahoma. Texas A&M drops from 3 to 7 after losing to Texas. Ole Miss moves up a spot despite losing Lane Kiffin. They're at number 6. Number 5 is Oregon. Number 4 is Texas Tech. 3, Georgia. 2, Indiana. And number 1 is Ohio State. So this is pretty crazy because, as everyone is saying, Notre Dame does not deserve a spot in the playoff, especially over Miami, because Miami beat them in week 1 of the season in Miami. It was only a 3-point loss. Miami also lost to Louisville and SMU, who are both unranked. But I understand when people say that they don't think that Notre Dame deserves to be in the college football playoff. I've watched them, I've looked at them these last 10 weeks after losing their first two games, and they look like one of the best teams in the country. Jeremiah Love looks like a Heisman Trophy candidate, not just a candidate, but one of the best players in the nation, and a Heisman Trophy winner. And this team has retained a lot of the talent that they had from last year. Marcus Freeman is a great head coach. I think that this team deserves to be in the college football playoff based strictly off the eye test. They look like one of the best teams in the country. Now, granted, they don't have that strong of a schedule, but again, a lot of the teams that they play are rivalry games, like the team that they just beat, Stanford, rivalry game, Navy, rivalry, Purdue, rivalry. So the fact that USC rivalry, a lot of these teams haven't been great, with the exception of USC. A lot of these teams haven't been great recently, and they don't have the star players that they used to. Like Purdue doesn't have Purdue doesn't have Drew Brees anymore. Stanford doesn't have Andrew Luck, although he's the GM now. They don't have Christian McCaffrey. They don't have Toby Gerhart back in the day. You remember how great he was? That's not Notre Dame's fault. They've been playing a lot of these games between anywhere's up to 100 years playing these rivalry games, and the way that the system is set up, it rewards Notre Dame for not being in a conference because they keep all of their revenue that they make. They don't have to share it with the conference. They have their own TV deal, and they also don't have to worry about winning the conference championship and losing a home playoff game despite getting a bye. If they make the playoff and they're ranked high enough, they can just host a playoff game by themselves. So the system does not punish Notre Dame for being independent and not in a conference. And if anything, it should encourage more teams to be independent and not for Notre Dame to join a conference. I understand that Miami beat Notre Dame head to head, but Notre Dame has looked like the better team over these last couple of months, and they don't have bad losses like Miami does. Now, with the situation with Alabama, I don't think that Alabama is going to be punished for losing to Georgia in the SEC championship game should they lose. And that's correct. You shouldn't be punished for making the conference championship and losing. So the reason why Alabama got in over Notre Dame is because they didn't want that scenario to happen. Now, Notre Dame ended up going on the road and blowing out Stanford, while Alabama struggled and only won by 7 points against Auburn. Auburn has one more win against Stanford. They're both not good teams. They're both not going to make a bowl game. But, the Iron Bowl is more of a rivalry, and Jordan Hare is a tougher place to play in than Stanford is. So I get that. In terms of BYU, I think BYU should be in over Notre Dame because they only have one loss on the season, and that's to Texas Tech. And if they lose their conference championship, even at an 11-2 record, with two losses to Texas Tech, who's now a top 5 team, I think that should still put them in the playoffs. So Notre Dame is a playoff team, but if they get left out, I understand why. So it is a bit, you know, interesting to see that. But the thing that sucks most about this is the matchup in the Big Ten championship between Indiana and Ohio State, because that is a number 1 versus number 2 matchup, and it literally doesn't matter because no matter what happens, whether Indiana wins or Ohio State wins, both of those teams are either going to be the number 1 team in the country, but they're going to be making the playoffs regardless. So that game should be the game of the year, but it literally has no stakes because of the college football playoff expanding. If it was a 4-team playoff, that would be an extra playoff game, and it would have so much more meaning. But since they expanded it, it now means nothing. So there's a lot of people who were saying that College Game Day got it wrong and has an SEC bias for going to the SEC championship game between Alabama and Georgia. Well, that's because Alabama and Georgia actually has playoff stakes, and sadly, the number 1 team versus the number 2 team in the country has no stakes. That sucks, but unfortunately, that's the world that we live in right now. But that does it for the first part of the Kevin Blekicki Show. We will be back after these messages. And welcome back to the Kevin Blekicki Show. We are now going to talk about everyone's favorite baseball team, the New York Mets. They recently just made a deal to bring in veteran reliever Devin Williams on a 3-year contract worth a total of $45 to $50 million, depending on which source you look at. And on the surface level, this is a great move. Devin Williams is a great relief pitcher. He can pitch in the 8th. He can pitch in the 9th. He can be a setup man. He can be a closer. There are some things that do concern me about this deal. First off, Devin Williams is coming off the worst statistical season of his career by far. Now, that is due in large part to the analytics that say that he just became unlucky, and he really wasn't as bad as the numbers say, and the advanced analytics say that he had a better expected ERA and a better expected average. Just things didn't work out in his favor. You can take that with a grain of salt or take it however you want. At the end of the day, he struggled, gave up runs, and lost his job as a part of it. He was a closer coming into the season for the Yankees, got that title removed, became a setup man, got better, became a closer again. So we'll see what happens when he plays in Queens. Obviously, Citi Field is a bigger ballpark than Yankee Stadium, so he might have more success because it's more of a pitcher's park. But this is one of those moves that really encapsulates the offseason for the Mets so far, because they've made 2 really big splashes, but they're dependent solely on what happens afterwards. Like, trading for Marcus Semien is good. He is a great defensive player. Trading him for Brandon Nimmo definitely improves his team's defense. However, offensively, the Mets are going to take a hit. Now, that is a good move on the surface, so long as the Mets are able to, whether it be via free agency or trades, shore up that outfield and their lineup. So if they make more moves and kind of supplement the offense that is lost by Marcus Semien's great defense, then it's a great move. If they're not able to, then obviously it's not a good move. And that is exactly what we have here. Devin Williams is a great reliever. I hope that he's able to bounce back after having a tough season last year, but it all depends on what they do with Edwin Diaz. If Edwin Diaz comes back and he's the 9th inning guy and he's the closer, having Devin Williams in there as the 8th inning setup man is going to make all the world of a difference. Then you're throwing in guys like Brooks Raley coming back, AJ Minter coming back, and then you have a much deeper bullpen. If Edwin Diaz is gone, then you have Devin Williams in that role, and he's shown in the past that he can thrive in that role, and he can also not do so well. We all remember that home run that he gave up against Pete Alonso in the wild card game in Milwaukee. So hopefully he left that stuff in Milwaukee and won't be bringing that into Citi Field. That will be an interesting dynamic when they both meet. And this is also Jesus Christ. This is also assuming that Pete Alonso comes back with the Mets. I completely forgot about that. The two biggest moves that the Mets need to make this offseason are bringing back Edwin Diaz and Pete Alonso. And I've been watching a lot of Mets podcasts. I've been talking to a lot of my Mets friends, and that is all something that we agree on. This is something that needs to happen. The Mets need to bring back Edwin Diaz and Pete Alonso. Those are the top two priorities for this team this year. So like I mentioned, we'll see where this ends up being, whether it ends up being a good move in addition to Edwin Diaz or something to replace Edwin Diaz. Hopefully, it is not a replacement, and hopefully, it's adding to it, but we'll never know until they actually drop the news. But there's also more news that dropped in the Mets world. A little while back, it was reported that there was a lot of turmoil in the 2025 Mets locker room. And of course, this is something that only happens when things go poorly for a team. You don't hear any struggles in the locker room when things are going well because winning cures everything. You never heard any bad stories about the Mets and any sort of turmoil in the locker room in 2024 because they had the OMG sign, they had the OMG song, they were singing and dancing, having a great time. They were, turning, the page after having a rough start to this season, 0-5 to OMG. And, everything was hunky dory. And then the 2025 season happens, and the Mets lose a lot of games against teams that they should beat, teams that they are far superior to. They end up losing in Miami after just needing to win to get into the playoffs. They can't do it, and they're on the outside looking in, and the Reds make the playoffs in their spot. Of course, they get absolutely waxed by the Dodgers in the postseason, and of course, we'll never know what would happen if the Mets actually made it. I would like to assume that they put up at least a better fight in that 3-game series against the Dodgers, but like I said, we'll never know. So obviously there was some turmoil in the locker room, and it mainly stemmed between Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor. And apparently there was a physical altercation, and this should be a surprise to absolutely no one because Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor have been beefing for a long time. Now, this is going back to the 2022 season. Before the season started, Francisco Lindor goes up to Jeff McNeil and says, "Hey, if you win the batting title, I'll buy you a brand new car." Jeff McNeil says, "Okay." And what does he do? He actually does it. He goes out and wins the batting title. Except Francisco Lindor doesn't hold up his end of the bargain. And forever there is a rift in between those two guys. Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor have never seemed to like each other. They always seem to butt heads. And, this latest report is not shocking in even the slightest bit of terms. So that was one of the reports. There was also another report, including Francisco Lindor, saying that there was a rift between him and Juan Soto, and how Juan Soto is this all business guy, and how he's strict, and he doesn't really like to interact with his teammates a whole lot because he's all about business and all about getting better. And Francisco Lindor, one of the words that they used was fashion. Francisco Lindor is big into fashion, and this one I don't really think is that big of a deal. At the end of the day, both guys stepped up, and you can say a lot about the Mets team and their failures in 2025, but you can't talk about Francisco Lindor, and you damn sure can't talk about Juan Soto. Juan Soto practically put this team on his back as much as he possibly could. He had statistically the best season of his career high in home runs, damn near 40-40 season. So he had over 100 RBIs as well. So those guys are great. And you know what? When it comes to Juan Soto and not liking his teammates, at the end of the day, the fault is his, because he decided to sign a 15-year deal with the Mets, and he knew that Francisco Lindor was on this team. And obviously, you don't really get to see a whole lot of players throughout the season unless you're playing against them. So it's possible that Juan Soto didn't really know what he was getting into. But man, you're not signing a 15-year deal with a team that you don't want to play for. At that point, it is all up to him. And he could have stayed in New York. He could have stayed with the Yankees. He did not have to sign with the Mets. So any turmoil that is between, whether it's Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto, or Juan Soto and someone else, that is on Juan Soto, because he signed up to be a part of this team. And you knew that Francisco Lindor was going to be on that team and one of the more prominent figures on the team. Now, while Juan Soto is definitely a better player than Francisco Lindor, this is still, in my opinion, Francisco Lindor's team. He's been here longer. He signed a long extension before even suiting up as a member of the Mets after he got traded from Cleveland. And so this is Francisco Lindor's team. And, as long as the two of them are able to produce at a high clip, I don't really care what happens. So this, like I said, this is the type of stuff that happens and comes out when your team is not doing well. And these stories tend to come out. Now, it is kind of an interesting time that it was released now, because Brandon Nimmo just got traded, and Brandon Nimmo wanted to be in line to be the next Mets captain, and not Francisco Lindor. And Francisco Lindor got a lot of talk as the Mets captain. And Brandon Nimmo's been here longer, so maybe he felt slighted, and maybe after he gets traded from the Mets, he kind of releases this out to whatever beat writer and kind of makes it a story. It's kind of a coincidence. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but it lines up perfectly with him being traded, and now all of a sudden this comes out. So we'll see if it was. I mean, we won't see if it's him. He's not going to admit to it, and I don't think anyone in the clubhouse is going to admit to it. But it is just interesting that as soon as Brandon Nimmo leaves, and someone who wanted to be the captain over Francisco Lindor suddenly starts to drop a lot of juicy details about him in the locker room, and they're all about Francisco Lindor. So that I find very interesting. But we will close out this show talking about the New York Jets. They get their third win of the season against the Atlanta Falcons. Shout out to the Jets. As I've mentioned all throughout this season, I will never apologize for the Jets winning. I don't care about their draft position. I don't care who they get in the draft, because they are an incompetent organization, and I'm just happy when they win, because wins come too far in between in this season. And you never know when you're going to win games. Now, after starting the season off 0-7, the Jets have now won 3 of their last 5 games. And I've wanted to see the Jets not just improve, but play with some heart, and try and win games. And I don't know if anything if it's correlated or not, but since the passing of Nick Mangold, this team has looked a lot better, and they have really played together. They've played hard. And you got to give a huge shout out to A.D. Mitchell, the guy who we ended up getting in the Sauce Gardner trade, along with those 2 draft picks, 2 first rounders. Sauce Gardner's now hurt. A.D. Mitchell now had the first 100-yard season, first 100-yard game of his career, and his first touchdown. So shout out to A.D. Mitchell. And who knows, him, Michi has been a pretty good receiver. So who knows, maybe next year or maybe later on in the season, you get Breece Hall in the action. You get Garrett Wilson, maybe if he comes back. This team, you got Mason Taylor, a really good young tight end. You got these draft picks. Maybe something can happen. Maybe this team can stop being so damn incompetent and forget winning a Super Bowl, but hopefully make the goddamn playoffs before I die. Who knows? But they play the Dolphins next week at home. The Dolphins can't really play in cold weather. So we'll see how that affects them. We'll see how the Jets play in that divisional matchup. But that does it for this edition of the Kevin Blekicki Show. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to follow me on social media, follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at Kevin Blekicki, and we'll see you again next week.